get going. Okay, so again, hope everybody's doing well. I'm sharing my screen, at least I think I am. Can everybody see that? Everybody confirm that I'm sharing well?
Yes.
Good.
All right, beautiful. All right, so our topic for today is, how do we determine who to interview? And it's I mean, if you're going to do voice of the customer work, who you're going to interview, let's let some more folks in the room here. That's sort of a critical topic. It's one that we probably don't talk about quite enough. The and so I'm going to sort of start with the conclusion, if you will, and we're going to review this. This is what we're going to cover today. And by the way, normally we actually begin with, going over the Blue Help article. So everything I'm gonna go over today is in the Blue Help article, but we're just going to kind of walk through that beat by beat with this presentation. So we're going to begin with the customer's job to be done, right? With the job to be done, you're going to hear me say this a lot today. By getting with the task, the next question is, who is it that's accomplishing this task? That's going to take us to the who. Once we have that job to be done, we're going to create a broader market ecosystem, adding other roles like job overseer, beneficiary, product purchaser, product influencer, etc. Is that Matt in the room? And then we ultimately have to make our selection. We're going to select who we want to create value for. And there can be more than one stakeholder. That's something we want to sort of thoughtfully think through. We're going to have our internal strategy guide this a lot regarding fit with capabilities and alignment with strategy and whatnot. And we might even want to consider launching multiple Blueprinter projects. So this is what we're going to cover today. Hopefully we're all in the right place. Maybe we should go in a little more detail. So I mentioned we begin with the customer's job to be done. Okay, the core job or targeted job is this thing we want to help them to get done better, right? A customer hires a product to accomplish a job. And then once we know what the job is, then we're gonna think about the job executor, this person who actually performs the job. So a lot of what we're gonna do as far as we're working up to who we're gonna interview, we're gonna begin with the job to be done. So we're gonna this language, this terminology of job to be done, job executor, and here's some other terminology. The job executor. This is a person who's not executing the job, but they're responsible for the results. There's the product purchaser. They're not executing the job, or they could be, but not necessarily. They're actually purchasing the product. There's somebody that may not perform the job, but they might influence the product selection. And then there's someone who benefits from the job beneficiary. So a lot of what we're going to do today, it's really driving home this terminology. And with the jobs to be done space, what this does is, look, when we're trying to select who to interview, we're not just doing this by ourselves, right? We're doing this within our company. We're doing this with our colleagues. And so these terms, job overseer, job executor, these are words that help us to communicate with each other very precisely as we're firming up a market. So by the way, feel free to stop me anywhere if you have any questions as we go. So, but what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through a series of examples, starting with something very simple. I might even say simplistic, and but then we're going to bring in some more realistic B2B scenarios. Certainly, something for B2B is these ecosystems can be pretty complicated, and sometimes we get the comment, wow, you're making our market seem complicated, and my answer is like, I'm not making your market complicated. We're using these terms, we're sort of digitizing it, we're defining it, and perhaps it just is complicated, right? So certainly that's one of the advantages we have at AIM, or anybody in a consulting type role, is you see lots of markets, you see lots of different situations. And so we're going to look at some different scenarios today. This first one I think is kind of fun though. I was with teaching a voice of the customer class one time. This was about 10 years ago. And there was an executive who was going to stand up in the room before I began and just give some opening remarks. and his remarks were I found very interesting. He said, we need to start interviewing our real customers, and we really need to eat our own dog food. And that expression just struck me as sort of funny. And I sort of made up this example on the fly about understanding this market ecosystem and jobs to be done, building off his dog food example. Because look, I'm aware that some of these terms might not be ones we use every day. Jobs to be done, market ecosystem. But after this example, I hope I think this will at least help with that. So let's go with dog food. Imagine your company makes dog food, and we have this job to be done of feeding the dog. All right, that's the job to be done, feeding the dog. Okay, so, and again, we're thinking about who to interview. So when we talk about the job to be done of feeding the dog, the next thing we want to ask ourselves is, who is feeding the dog? Who is doing this job? And that brings us to Junior. Now, Junior is a sharp young man. He is ready to go. He's up for this task of feeding the dog. Okay, Junior is our job executor. But what might be the other components of a market ecosystem, right? What about these other roles? So we've got this concept of this job overseer. Again, that's somebody who's responsible for how well this job's done. They may not necessarily be performing the job. And then there's this product purchaser. Somebody's buying the dog food. And then somebody else could be influencing that purchase selection. And then there's somebody who benefits from the job. They're not performing it, they benefit. So we have our job, we have our market here. Junior is feeding the dog, right? So who's our job overseer? So we've got mom. Mom doesn't feed the dog, but she's responsible for the results. If heaven help us, the dog dies, or maybe something not quite so bad, the dog gets fat, or maybe there's food all over the floor, right? However, if this job starts going off track, even though mom's not doing this job every day, she's responsible for how well it's done, and she's going to circle back around and correct Junior. Now, the product purchaser, and who buys the product and who influences that selection. Well, that's also mom again. And so there's brings us another important point. So we break out these roles as distinct things, but they can be the same people. Like the same people can execute multiple roles. And so let me ask you, blueprinting practitioners, who is our job beneficiary? Who benefits from this job?
Doggy.
The
dog.
dog.
The dog.
Thank you. Thank you. We have this nice Labrador Retriever named Tuesday, who benefits from this job being executed well. So now this brings us to the question. So we framed out this market. So who are we going to interview? I'll throw it out to you guys again. Who should we interview to understand this job of feeding the dog?
Mom.
And Junior.
Mom and Junior. I agree. We'll go with both of those. So, but we break it. So it's useful to pull these out into a matrix. So each of these are separate. You can think of them as markets. A job to be done, and the person doing it is the market. Junior's feeding the dog. Mom is overseeing this job. She's also purchasing the product, etc. Okay, so we probably won't interview the dog. Now, not only is that ridiculous in this scenario because dog can't talk, but even in the real markets and real world, usually also doesn't make sense. But let's think about, once we frame this up, how is this going to look in our blueprinter? How is this going to look in our blueprinter software? So we have,
Scott?
yeah,
Scott, you can't interview the dog, but maybe the vet.
Well, that's back to, let me back up. That is back to, the vet would be a purchase influencer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah. 100%.
He's also assessing he's assessing the weight of the vet is assessing the weight of the dog and health of the dog and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Great comment. The vet would be a purchase. I didn't list them here, obviously, but a vet would be a purchase influencer. So we talked through it, because The vet's not feeding the dog. The vet's not responsible for how well the dog is fed, but the vet could influence this purchase. And in real B2B, we have we have real purchase influencers. And it's useful to make that we understand that, because there's going to be, anyway, there can be value in interviewing them, but there also can be limitations of what they can tell us.
Right.
A great comment there. I want just once for somebody to say we should interview the dog. Anyway, so what does it look like in Blueprinter? So we our job to be done. That's our scope. That's what we're there to talk about. And just as some of you said, we're going to interview Junior and we're going to interview Mom. And our question then, so here's something you can hear me say a few times today. There really needs to be a very tight connection between this job to be done and the Junior and Mom in this case. And from there, our blueprinting interview just goes very naturally. What problems do you have when feeding the dog? And in this case, Fido feels food all over the floor, and I have to do it quickly. So this is Junior talking, because I'm feeding him before school when I'm late. Fido follows me around. He steps in his bowl. He's not interested. He tips the bowl over, makes a mess. So, Junior feeding the dog. So for example, these are things the vet probably wouldn't tell us, right? Or wouldn't be as aware of, unless, except in his own experience or her own experience actually feeding a dog. So this is what it would look like in the software. So there's my very simple example. So now let's go and let's look at a more realistic example for us, okay, in B2B. So let's say you work for a textile company. All right, you make textiles and you're really interested, like you currently you make some of your textiles go into surgical sutures, all right? And you'd like to deepen your penetration there, right? You want to go deeper into this suture space. You've got some new promising technologies. Okay, so who do we interview? Who is our customer? And this is a very common starting point. And by that, what do I mean? I mean, I say we begin with our job to be done, but often we're really one step before that is we are beginning with our product or our technology. And from there, what job our customers hiring our products to do. So we make sutures, and we make textiles, and we're wanting to deepen our penetration in this market. So we're going to define this ecosystem, right? And there's lots of, we would have, if I was coaching your team, we would have conversation around what's the job to be done. But just to keep us moving today, we're going to say the job to be done is closing a wound. Right? That's what customers hire sutures for. In fact, here you can see the little needles. Customers hire our products, our sutures, to close wounds. All right. So who might that be? Who might the job executors be? And then we begin with, longer list, a list that's longer than just one, right? It's funny somebody said veterinarian, because we could hire, sutures, non-surgical doctors, veterinarians close wounds, military field doctors close wounds, lots of different types of people close wounds. So which one are we going to select? And again, Blueprinter has some tools that can even help us walk through that. In tool 1.4, during the market selection section, we would frame up these different markets, score them, and we won't go through that today. It's a topic for another day. But let's say we select surgeons. We've selected surgeons as our job executor. And from there, we continue, just like we did with the dog food, we can build out the rest of our market ecosystem. And so the job overseer, in this case, we might have hospital executives or even, supervisors that over the physicians. Somebody's going to purchase the product. They're not closing the wound, but they purchased the product. And so every company has their procurement folks. For a large hospital, it's probably what you have. Purchase influencers. You could have nurses, but you could even have lots of different influencers there. And then who's the job beneficiary for this job of close a wound?
The patient.
That patient. Thank you. Yes, we have patients. And so once we get this framed out, then let's see how, we would ask the question, who are we going to interview? Are we going to interview the patients? Are we going to interview? I'll throw it out to you. Who do you think? Which group do you think we should interview?
Nurses for sure.
Okay, nurses.
Surgeons?
And
Surgeons.
surgeons. Yeah.
Surgeons. Yep. What about the hospital executives? Would you interview them?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I agree. And yet in B2B, this is often a very common error. A very common error where we're looking at this job of closing a wound. But then the logic is, well, we really need the executives and the high level folks, these are the companies we're selling to. So we want to interview, this is what people are telling me, they want to interview the executives. But yet, we want to stay close to where the knowledge is, where the knowledge about the problems are. And so I think I would agree with you. So surgeons and purchase influencers, and probably not patients, right? I'm not saying yes or no, right? It's a conversation that we would have. But when we frame it up this way, at least we can sort of have that conversation. But it's normally, in this case, you probably would not do the executives. So let's say, just to keep things simple, let's say we selected surgeons. There's our market: surgeons, closing wounds, and we could even narrow it down from there, right? We could, what types of surgeries, head, heart surgery versus plastic surgery. And so either we're going to target one of these, something more specific, or we can go in the settings section of step 2. And maybe if we're going to say all surgeries are included, then what that means is we probably need to make sure and interview somebody representing each of these sort of subcategories. Because if we say that we're interviewing, we're covering all surgeries, but we only interview plastic surgeons, we're probably going to miss some things. So because we've selected all surgeries, we're going to want to make sure to include all those elements of diversity. So again, let's look at how this would look in Blueprinter. And again, for our example, we could have chosen other things, but for our example, we're going with surgeon, and then we have our job statement again of closing a wound. And so with our conversation, we say, what problems do you have when closing a wound? And the physician tells us, well, the first 24 hours after surgery, that's critical. If anything was unclean during the procedure, infection sets in. And so then we get all this additional, probing about, this infection. And ultimately, maybe we get to an outcome statement that is, minimize the time to determine if a wound will develop an infection. And certainly this is, could the hospital executive had some insight on this? Yeah, but could the patient have had some insight on this? Yeah. So, we can often learn something from most everybody within that ecosystem. But I think we'd all agree that the surgeons and probably the nurses are probably the best. And so the default answer we want to really think about is who those job in that ecosystem, that first one, the job executor. Who's closing the wound? The person closing the wound is going to know the most about the challenges when closing the wounds. So any questions so far?
No.
All right, well, good. So now we make sutures, and certainly with our technology, we always want to improve how our products perform. Always might be a big word, but that's typically something we get very excited about, making better sutures. We do a project just like the one we showed, challenges closing a wound. And, we learned that, that one of the biggest problems is post-surgery infections, right? And if we can have wow, if we could have some technology in our sutures where where, bacteria and viruses just can't survive. So the sutures literally kill bacteria. Well, that's something we can get really excited about, as we think about our future technologies and stuff. But there's this thing called consumption jobs you want to think about. Because imagine what if you make copper wire, right? I mean, that's a pretty stable product, and the things people hire copper wire for, to travel, as a conduit for electricity is probably going to be, it's been that way for a long time. It's probably going to stay that way for a long time. There's probably not a lot of innovation in the wire, right? What if like lumber? What if we make lumber or hammers or pipes or valves or, or thread or bolts? All these types of things I mean, not to say that you can't have new alloys for better hammers or, or better, some kind of better alloys for the copper. Not to say it's not possible, but there's a whole category. There's a whole category of innovation we can do when we innovate around how these products are consumed. And I'll say even with our sutures, even with how the sutures consumed. And these jobs are called consumption jobs. And we I've seen this across the board. We look across these, we dismiss them a little bit because I don't know why. I think we're just interested in making better hammers and better wire and better sutures, better textiles. But we have this whole category of jobs around how a product is consumed. But let me show that can have tons of opportunities for innovation. Let me show you what I mean. So this is a list of typical consumption jobs. It's not a complete list by any means, but just say, well, we could say that this is a typical list of consumption jobs you might have. So jobs. So none of these have anything to do with changing the product. So we could even have sutures written in there, like select the sutures, purchase the sutures, pay for the sutures, get them delivered. And some of these will make more sense than others. Return them, install the product, learn to use the product, use it, obtain support, repair, upgrade, and dispose of. I came from John Deere, and a huge consumption job with, well, I should say, like John Deere and compact tractors. Okay, I was a product manager for compact tractors, and a huge consumption job with tractors is learning to use the tractor. People, they get the tractor home. They were there with the dealer, and everything looks so easy with the dealer, and now they're by themselves trying to use this thing, and all of a sudden it's difficult. And using it is different than using it. Using it means you know how to learn, how difficult it is to use once you know how. So that learn to use with tractors was a really big deal. Obtaining support, repairing, upgrading. You think about things like, Amazon, that's a pretty high tech company. But when they began, they really innovated around purchasing and paying for things, right? And that's still their, well, I don't even know what their core is now. We're going to all work for Amazon eventually. But anyway, but their initial innovations it wasn't around making better books. It was around making the, innovations around purchasing the books. Same with iTunes, made it easy, or Netflix, things that make it easier to purchase things. Netflix, well, now they give us movies, but originally it wasn't about better movies, but something like Netflix, right? It was about the process of, essentially that one, see, it's not phrased perfectly for movies, but essentially that was about obtaining or getting the movies delivered, right? So lots of innovation around things that are not even changing the product per se around these consumption jobs. And so I mentioned this, it's just a big point in all of itself, but when we really get to thinking about who we want to interview, beginning with this set of consumption jobs, is often a good thing to do. So let's look at a couple more examples with these. And I won't do any more silly dog food ones for now. We'll stick with some realistic ones. So let's imagine that we make commercial, well, first of all, let me back up. Any questions about the difference in a consumption job or, you know, or as opposed to the core job of a product itself. Does that make sense? Okay. We got plenty of stuff written about that as well. Okay, so imagine that we make commercial light fixtures. Okay, so and in this, the particular scope of innovation for your product is, you know, we're not going to do LED or some new technology. You know, it's really, we want to innovate around consumption jobs, and so we have the same list as before. We have select the light fixtures, purchase the light fixtures, pay for the light fixtures. You know, all these different, and again, this is not necessarily a complete list. This is just a list that it's a typical template to pull from, put it that way. And let's say after lots of discussion, we decide to go with this consumption job of install the light fixtures. This is the one that we want to target for innovation. We could have targeted any of these. So we select the job to be done of install the light fixtures. Now back to the topic of our session this morning. Who might the job executor be? Who's installing light fixtures?
Maybe a facilities maintenance person.
Facilities maintenance person. Yeah, and somebody else.
Electrician.
Electrician. Yeah. So we would have conversation around that. And again, for today, this is just a made-up example, so any of those could be certainly valid. The one I went with was electrical contractors, and I didn't put this in there, but sort of the scenario I had in mind was like for new construction. But again, it could be anybody who is doing this. And so then we build out the rest of the ecosystem. So in this case, the job overseers is general contractors. They're not installing the lights, but they're responsible for how well it's done. The job beneficiary is the owners of the building, but also it's the people who are going to live in the building later, or, you know, they benefit from how well that's done. You know, we have a product purchaser. And then it was interesting that you guys on your own brought up that the veterinarian as a purchase influencer for the job of feed the dog, because this is a pretty significant purchase influencer in this space. Architects as far as, you know, which as far as installation, but yeah, they're not the ones doing the installation. So then we could also have some complementary product stakeholders. I won't go into all this, you know, maybe distributors, you know, bulb manufacturers, people who make office furniture, etc. But let's just say we had all this conversation and we decided to go with this. Our job to be done is install the light fixtures, and our job executor is electrical contractors. So here's how that would look in Blueprinter. You know, we're going to go ask our electrical contractors, what problems do you have when installing light fixtures? That's why, like, if any of you've been through our training, you know, it's a pretty important. Well, when I'm coaching a team, even in our training, I always make sure they put that scope up there, because it's a good habit to get in the habit of thinking of this job to be done. And once you have it there as a moderator, everything goes. It just goes. We have our agenda down the side. What problems do you have when installing light fixtures? What would you like to see in your ideal world when installing light fixtures? And then again, in this case, we selected electrical contractors. And again, it's very important that there's a direct link between who is listed there and this job to be done. Maybe as you're sort of preparing for your interview, ask yourself, are electrical contractors the ones who are installing light fixtures? And the answer should be yes. You know, going back to my silly example, where I had the dog, you know, we had the job beneficiary as the dog. Is the dog the one feeding the dog? You know, maybe that's probably a bad example, but I think you get where I'm going. You need a direct one-to-one link between whatever's written here and the job to be done here on the scope. All right, let's go back to this scenario. Let's pick something different. So again, we make commercial light fixtures, and maybe we did a separate project on installation. But this time we're going to select some different consumption jobs. We're going to go with select the light fixtures, pay for them, use them, and repair them. Okay, so we're going to select some different consumption jobs, and that gives us these, and I call them markets. A job and a job executor combined is a market. And I'm not sure why I put not applicable to job overseer, because we probably could have thought of somebody. But anyway, so who's the job beneficiary of these? Patrons of the business. Again, the purchasing rep. Again, we still have this architect as the purchase influencer. But again, we're going to look at, we have these jobs to be done, select the light fixtures, and then, who's doing that? Building owner. Who's paying for them? Again, the building owner. Who's using the light fixtures? The building owner. And now earlier we had somebody mention the building maintenance personnel. So now we have them repairing the light fixtures. We've got the building maintenance personnel, and upgrading the light fixtures. Again, the building maintenance personnel. So we have these two markets. And let's say that we're gonna target both of them, because again, B2B, it's common that we're gonna have more than one job to be done involved, and even more than one executor. Okay, that's not super unusual. So how we would have that well, I take that back. I just have the building owner targeted, but you can imagine here we also have the maintenance as well. Now, I could have had in the scope here, notice I don't have the job listed this time. I just have the product. And I certainly could have had select, pay for, use, and repair, and upgrade the light fixtures. I could have had that. That's a little long. But what I chose to do instead is just begin with the product. And I could still begin by asking them, what problems do you have with light fixtures? But how do we get around to, we've scoped our project a little more narrowly around that, right? Around selecting, paying for, using, repairing, and upgrading. Well, I'll ask you, how do you think we might introduce that more narrowness of the scope? Any ideas?
You could do it in the current state questions.
You could do that in current state questions. You could do that. With this though, I really want that to be the main part of the interview, right? So I'm going to say current state. I want to keep that for the rapport and reconnaissance. So all right, I won't keep you guys waiting anymore. That's where you could use your triggered ideas, right? So this is really we're really interested in these five consumption jobs: selecting the light fixtures, paying for them, using them, repairing the light fixtures, and upgrading the light fixtures. And in this case, you actually could even begin the interview. When I say begin, after current state, instead of problems, you could actually show this then. But you know what? I would probably still get a few yellow notes. I would still say, hey, just what are some of the challenges you have with light fixtures? But as a moderator, in the back of my mind, I know I'm really highly interested in these 5 consumption jobs. And so if that conversation starts to go outside of those 5, I'm going to more quickly transition into triggered ideas, and I'm going to introduce these 5. And then what I'm going to do, so again, imagine we've got building owners and building maintenance personnel. Well, I'm probably going to get the most insight from building owners on like these 3, right? Selecting, paying for, and using. And the building maintenance personnel, if they're in the call or present, then I'm probably going to get the most insight from them about these 2, about repairing them and upgrading them. That's just natural. But what do we have? We've got, again, we've got this one-to-one relationship between building owners, who are doing these 3 jobs, and the building maintenance folks who are doing those 2. So we've targeted those jobs for innovation, and we have the folks there who are doing the work. The person repairing the light fixtures is the one who's going to have the most information about the problems repairing the light fixtures. The person who's selecting them is going to have the most information about the challenges with selecting them. You can think about these as like 5 little mini scopes, 5 little mini blueprinter projects. So how you have, even like you have problems, you can even say, what problems are you having when selecting the light fixtures? And you can move on. What problems do you have when paying for the light fixtures? And for that matter, you can say, what would you like in your ideal world when selecting the light fixtures? So each of these, it's like 5 little mini blueprinting projects within this scope of light fixtures. So that's a great way of using the trigger map feature to focus in on the consumption jobs that you're used to. And by the way, so when we're doing the consumption jobs, really the assumption is we're not innovating the light fixture. I mean, we might, that could be, I mean, but only if it helps us to get one of these done better.
Looks good, Scott. By the way, sorry I came in late. The team was in dire straits that I was coaching, so I apologize for that. But looks like you guys are on a roll here.
No problem. Have really good insights from the group here. This is probably a good time for me to pause though. Any questions so far? Let me say something. Let me back up. This idea of consumption jobs is something that I have, when teaching voice of the customer before, I have confused masses of people on this. So I'm still searching for a better way to teach it. But any questions about so maybe I'll just repeat it once more, just out of knowledge of history of how poorly I've done explaining it before. So with the sutures, right? If we're innovating the job, if we're innovating the suture itself, right? We're going to that job of closing wounds, right? And how well it does with that job of closing wounds. But when we go to consumption jobs, we're not innovating the suture as much as we are selecting the suture, purchasing the suture, obtaining support for the suture. So again, all these won't make the same amount, won't necessarily apply. But any questions about consumption jobs versus the core job? All right.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
I really love the concept. It really is useful. I think you succeeded in teaching it. So don't keep telling yourself you're not. But the question I had may be obvious, but if you have these multiple functions or people or markets, you call them, for instance, the building owner and the contractor, would you still try to get them into an interview in the same room, the building owner and contractor, like we do when you have a product interview? You often have purchasing and engineering and operations in the same room, or what?
It depends. And that's all I have to say about that. No, just kidding. Yeah. So let's think about it in a couple different ways: discovery and preference, right? So the purpose of discovery is to get that larger list of needs, right? So if you're and also I think I would think a bit realistically about how difficult it is to get the appointment. It's like, what would be ideal? We describe ideal, and then we'll kind of back into what we were able to get. So let's just take a scenario on the screen: building owners and maintenance personnel. Well, also there's sort of the practical issue of how well one group might know about the other. So in this case, the building owners or the building maintenance personnel, they might have, well, I don't know that they will. Anyway, I mean, sometimes they might naturally, the building owner might have some sense of the difficulties in repairing, maybe. But beyond that, in the ideal scenario, actually, I would have separate discovery interviews for each of these groups. Why? So with the building maintenance personnel, I can go really deep into all the challenges repairing and get all the information about repairing and upgrading. And with the building owner, I'm going to get really deep into everything about selecting, paying for, and use. Now, again, I'm only talking discovery at this point. So that way I can really keep that conversation focused around what that group is an expert in. Now, again, we're only talking discovery, so we can get this larger list with each of those groups. Now, when we get to preference, it's a little more complicated.
Yeah. Well, you go ahead first, Scott. I had a couple thoughts on that too, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, when preference, we want to come back to how the company is actually going to make a decision. We want to predict how well they're going to make a decision. And this answer is a little different on consumption versus the core job. So for this one, what we have here, I believe I would have a mixed group, so that you have the benefit of learning where they have different priorities, and also so you can learn how they make a decision as a company. Now, now having said that, let me back way up to our surgical example. If I want to make better sutures, right? I really want to get deep into, I want to make the next generation sutures, right? So in that, I mean, I want a superior product for sutures. Sorry, I'm making everybody dizzy. I'm trying to get to my suture ecosystem, which is right here. Right here. So at this point, I'm probably, so maybe I had, maybe I had procurement. So I want to go deep into this. Maybe I had procurement people and nurses and hospital executives. I had them all involved. But I think for this one, if I really want to, I really want to understand the priorities that surgeons have when closing wounds, because I want a next generation suture. Then to me, these hospital executives, this is probably just noise. This is all noise. And I'm going to probably only have, surgeons there. Now, one more thing, then I'll turn it over to you, Dan. Remember, we don't have to do everything with a single blueprinting project, right? If we want to innovate around sutures or whatever, we can have one project. When I say project, I mean, as in the blueprinting project. You can have one project around the sutures, and you could have the sutures themselves, and you could have another one around purchasing sutures. And all of a sudden, the product purchaser becomes the main job executor. So you could have multiple blueprinting projects all feeding information, all about different jobs. This one is about, actually having a better suture. Another one might be about the process of purchasing it. Okay, I'll turn it over now, Dan.
Yeah, actually, we're kind of, I was going to say that pretty much the same thing you were going to say. In preference, it comes down to the buying decision. How's that made? Discovery, as you were saying, Scott, you can't go too far wrong. It's an additive process, right? You're just getting more and more outcomes, and you can kind of sort them out later. There's probably some benefits doing different ways, but you can't go too far wrong. But you can't go too far wrong with preference interviews if you don't think it through carefully. But you nailed it. So let's say you had lighting fixtures for an existing building that are being replaced, and those maintenance people work for the same building owner. It's all one company. Well, they're going to be balancing in that preference interview when they're having their debate. They're going to be thinking about how long it takes to install the light fixture and how long the lights will last, will have to be replaced, and what's the energy cost. So you want to kind of capture that whole decision-making process. But let's imagine it was a new building. Now you've got a building contractor who's building this thing, and they're putting in light fixtures. They want to know what the installation time is and how fast it goes and all that. So now it's almost like different points in the value chain. So you might have a whole set of preference interviews, around installation factors, and then you might have another set of preference interviews for the building owners. So you could actually sub-segment your markets by the architects, the installers, and the building owners, and then you could decide who in the value chain is making the decisions, really optimize your product for them, but also be able to market to all of them. But it all gets down to the buying decision, I think, for preference.
Yeah, and I think all that's a discussion. I think I would find myself, so it's a tension between how the buying decision is made, in which you want all the stakeholders involved, and versus getting the best priorities as far as innovating around that job, in which you would really have, like Dan said, a separate preference. So in this case, the building owner, you would have a separate preference for them and versus the building maintenance. So if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You want both. You like to learn both. Yep. All right. So we showed how that looks in Blueprint. Okay. So now I've really described how we select the job to be done, how we select these markets, how we look at the broader thing. But I really sort of just glossed over the actual decision of which one do you select. So let's take a look about that now. So certainly you want to you want to study an area where there are unmet market needs, right? We want to do that. But also, also we want to think about an alignment with like what our companies, where we're interested in, what we're interested in, where our capabilities are. And this really needs to be in this in-between area. And it's as some companies, especially if you've not done voice of customer in a long time, it's like it comes from a good place. It comes from a good place in that it's like we don't want to bias these interviews. We don't want to bias these things. We want to learn just anything they want to say. But we want it's still what we learn. We need to learn something in a space where we're interested in targeting. Let me make that a little more concrete. The market we're going to select, we want it to be a fit with our capabilities, alignment with our strategy, and the scope for this particular project. So for fit with capabilities, some questions to ask. Is this a job to be done we're serving today? Could a current or planned products do we think could address a need there? Do we have technology that we think? What about our distribution? Does our brand play there? Now, you might be protesting and say, well, we don't know what the product is yet. And that's a very fair point. But usually, we usually have some sense of it's just a market that we can serve with our products, might have a chance of serving. If we're making textiles, we're making sutures, we're studying sutures, that's probably going to be a good fit. Alignment with the strategy. Questions to ask. Is it in our strategic plan as it's written now? Is this called out there? Is it mentioned at all? Our current leadership, how much enthusiasm did they have for pursuing this market? Things are going to get very real when you get your preface interview back, when you build your market case. And if it's for a market that your company leaders don't have any enthusiasm for, it'll be very difficult at that point. And then this is the one that's overlooked a lot. Well, I think we just assume we have internal alignment when we don't. When we're going to do that project, are you looking to really impact sales this year? Are you looking like to take a blue one and make it green, a tweak? Or do you want like a long-term strategy to drive your R&D for 30 years? And the answer is not all three. It's not all of the above. I don't know what the answer is, but it's not all of the above. And often members of a team, have different of these objectives. And so which market we study, it needs to be in sync with how far that is out. And here's one thing to think about. If it's way far out, then often we want to study that core job, like closing a wound. How long are people going to be closing wounds? Forever. How long have people been closing wounds? A long time. The shorter the scope, the more you want to think about those consumption jobs, upgrading it, repairing it, purchasing it, installing it. Very short term, those consumption jobs, because we're not changing the product that much per se. But anyway, all we ask, I think, is it's a conversation to have. Now, unfortunately, when we're working with teams on this, they're sort of looking for insight from us. We can help facilitate the conversation, but we are certainly not going to know innovation scope wise. We're not going to know what your goals are nearly as much. So this is a place we can facilitate, but really each blueprinting team, these are questions. We can certainly help to frame up that ecosystem, but ultimately that's not a decision that we really make. So with that, I just have a few final remarks. I went over the 30 minutes. I knew I was going to, but I think it's an important topic. So final comments. Make sure you have a one-to-one match with the job, feed the dog, and the job executor, Junior. I think you missed that one, Dan, but that's one of my fun stories. And if you don't have a alignment, you should start to see it. You don't want to ask the person who owns the building about challenges with installing the lights if they're not doing it. Don't ask the CEO about challenges when closing the wound if they're not the one performing that job. So with that, I'm just going to review. How do we determine who to interview? We're going to begin with that customer's job to be done. We're going to create that market ecosystem. And then we're going to select who to create value for. And it can be more than one stakeholder, but it's something we want to thoughtfully think through. Ultimately, we're going to let our internal strategy guide that selection with fit, with capabilities, strategy alignment, and innovation scope. And then as came up at the end, we might consider launching multiple BP projects, blueprinter projects. Maybe if we want to deeply understand installation, and also we want to deeply understand, I don't know, selection, for example. But that is all I have, folks. What, any, hopefully, oh, here we have a question in chat here. Let's see. Let's see. The question is it reasonable to say that you interview executives if you want to go after long-term innovation, and interview job supervisors and purchase influencers if you want to re-energize your current product? I think generally so. I think generally so. I think generally so, but executive, look, all of us, all people, doesn't matter if you're executive or we all are terrible at predicting technology adoption. We don't know, right? History is littered with, I mean, like the CEO of IBM said the world market for computers is like 25 to 30. You know, the guy there's a movie executive in the 30s was looking at television and said, nobody's ever going to sit at their house and watch a movie on a plywood box. You know, we're all terrible at predicting technology adoption. So I think I would really stick. I mean, that's probably true, but I think it's more true that the core job, in other words, closing a wound, is going to be more stable over time, and therefore valid for longer term analysis, will provide benefit for longer term driving future R&D. Look, we discover that, you know, infections is a challenge. Well, how do we make sutures that destroy bacteria? That's probably going to the lab. That might be difficult to predict how long that's going to take. But the job of purchasing sutures, well, that's how many are on the shelf, and you know, those are problems that we can solve with services essentially.
Looks like Will's got a hand up there.
Oh, okay. All right.
Hey, Scott, curious if you could spend a few minutes talking about innovation scope for a given project. I want to make sure I'm clear on what you mean by that, please. Let
me describe the endpoints. Think of it as endpoints. One way to think about it is the amount of time that you're going to what you're going to learn. What's the time frame that's going to help you in? So let's go on the super shortest time frame. We want to improve sales now. Super shortest. So what we're going to learn, maybe we're going to use that. You know, there's problems with the sutures or whatever. We're going to use that for marketing messages for sales. That's super short. Super long term is so something years out. We want the insights to help us to really, drive what our technology should be. Solve these big technical problems. That's the ultimate on the long end. So, Dan talks about the differences in product development versus technology development. We could have a blueprinter project to inform technology development. That's on the super long end. But you could have things always in between. And here's where this, well, first of all, Will, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thanks. That's helpful, Scott.
Yeah. And so at the short, let's go back to the short end. It's really to inform sales and marketing of current products. We're not going to change it. When we move over, when we make our scope a little bit bigger, now that could be maybe drive incremental, like we're willing to change a few features or change some colors. And then as we get a little bit longer term, maybe now the whole product can change, and then maybe the whole platforms can change, and then we keep going all the way. And probably on the very end is that it's going to drive technology development. And so when we're selecting who to interview, it's going to that's really going to impact where along that continuum we are. What I find commonly is that the blueprinting team has not had this conversation, and you've got they wanted to sort of do everything. They wanted to drive sales, they wanted to drive technology development, I don't think that's the best solution. I would bare minimum have the conversation about how broad the innovation scope is.
You know, Scott, it's interesting going back to Olga's question on who to talk to. It's kind of like our team. There could be a range of time horizons that we might pick, and then we just need to be thinking about what are the relevant time horizons that people we're talking to, because some people might go on the shop floor and do a job that 8 hours and go home, and that's what they're thinking about. And you might have a director of technology who's thinking out years. So it's probably a healthy thing to see, make sure we don't have a mismatch on those time horizons.
Yeah, time horizon. That's a much more concise way of stating it than I did. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, if there's any questions on anything else, this is a great topic, Scott. I've seen your materials. You go as deep on this as anybody on the planet. So if you guys were working hard to keep up, there's a reason for that. It's really good stuff. Anything else on this or other topics that might have come to mind over the last week or a couple of weeks that you want to bring up? I'll just share one thing that I learned, and that is if you have a team that speaks another language and they're doing all their interviews, don't let them go too far before you get a translation. That's why I was late for today. It's like, oh no, this thing is going off the rails. They were saying, would you like this? How about with this? Would you like? I was like, no, no, no. So at any rate, that's just a little learning. I'll just share one more quick thing. Can I share quickly, Scott, what we've done with the new page? Let me just share my screen here, and then we'll let you guys go in the last 2 minutes. When you go out to your Blueprinter software, don't be surprised if you see something extra here. So what you're going to see is you will now have a new home page on your Blueprinting Center with all kinds of cool stuff on that. So check that out when you get a chance. If you're totally baffled by it, let us know, because we did a bad job of it. It only came out Saturday, just 2 days ago. But also, if you want to know a little bit more about it, go to your Blue Help section and just type in Blueprinting Center. Oops, there we go. I think I got it. And go to the Blueprinting Center article here. And this article will tell you all about what's in here. So at any rate, just want to let you know that that's brand new. We're kind of excited about that. This does also include a new certification program. And it's probably the people who are coming to Monday Master Classes who will be some of our first certified practitioners. And when you pass this requirement for certified practitioners, then we move on to Blue Belt. Gosh, Scott, maybe that's something we ought to do in a Monday Master Class pretty soon is insert this as a topic, you know?
I think so. Yep.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Any questions or other thoughts anybody has? All right. Well, thank you, Scott. And thank you all for coming. And we'll see you next time around. Okay, a couple of weeks.